All right, my name is Adria Terry. I wear many hats. I introduced that I do work for a commercial real estate firm called Hines. I've been there only for a couple months. I've just recently transitioned into corporate America. I don't know why I took that step, but I'm still figuring that out. Previously, before that, I was at the University of Houston Center for Diversity and Inclusion for 3 years, where I worked with students, faculty, and staff on topics of diversity and inclusion, how we can create more inclusive spaces, right? So today, I'm gonna talk to you all about understanding diversity to advance equity, right? How can we really start to understand who we are as diverse individuals in order to advance equity, and what does that look like, right? So today, we are gonna get out of our comfort zones. We're gonna talk a lot about our individual identities. We're gonna talk about who we are as diverse people, and then being able to connect that to the work that we do on campus. Does that sound good? All right, you all have had your coffee now, come on, stay with me, right? So I like to lay out a couple agreements before we get started, just to set the tone for how this workshop will go. Respect is the first one, right? It looks different for everyone. We all have different definitions for what respect looks like. But because we're gonna be open and sharing in this space, I want us to keep our respect hats on, right? We're gonna be open and we're gonna challenge ourselves. You will not leave my workshop a diversity expert, okay? You will not leave here an inclusion expert, but I hope that I'll be able to plant a seed that throughout this experience will continue to be watered and will grow by the other messages that you'll hear today. So I challenge you to take something from this presentation. This is a safe space. Again, we'll be sharing, we'll be talking a lot to each other, so I want us to feel comfortable in this space sharing, right? And while I can't guarantee that, I do want to say that this is also a brave space where you could feel brave enough to, if I'm asking a question, shout out and answer, right? Engage in conversation. This is probably the most important agreement on here, because it is going to be a long, boring hour if I stand up here and talk at you the entire time. We're going to work together. We're going to talk to each other. And then share in airtime, right? Let's make sure we're giving everyone time for all voices to be heard and included. So if I do my job, I'm going to increase your understanding of diversity. We're going to explore and discuss some personal cultural identities, and we're going to make some connections between your identities and the work that you do as a faculty or staff member. Is that cool? All right, let's get started. So I want to start off by talking about diversity in a way that we might traditionally not, right? So turn to the person next to you and discuss briefly 1 minute what is happening in the world. What's on your mind? What are you passionate about? What's going on? Share with the person next to you really quickly. What's happening? Okay. All right, round those conversations up. Round them up. All right. So, all right, well, now y'all have had your coffee. Y'all are talking now. Reel you back in. All right, if you can hear me, please. All right. So what came up, right? What's happening in the world? Just shout out some stuff. What do we talk about? The debates. What else? Mental illness. Work is happening. Yes. What? Guns. The little boy told to cut his hair or wear a dress. September 11th. What else did we talk about? Y'all were talking. Right? So when we think about all these different things that are happening and much more, right? That we only scratch the surface of the things that are happening in the world. They are all in one way or another linked to our identities, right? And not only that, the way we perceive those messages, what we hear in those messages, two of us could be watching the same exact program and hear completely different things, right? All of that is linked to identity. How we experience our identities and our lived experiences, it helps us process what we're hearing, right? But we don't traditionally think about diversity in that way, do we? No. So where do we normally, if we say that we talk about diversity, where do we hear messages about diversity? Where does what we understand about diversity come from? Parents. Our parents, how we grew up. The workplace. HR policies. I heard something up here. Social media, huge one. Religious institutions, what we learned in school, what we hear from our friend groups. All of these things inform what we know about diversity and what is mentioned. So when the word is mentioned, where does our minds go? When the word diversity, it goes to race, hot topics, gender. Something's about to change. We're on the rise, right? What else? Anything else come up? Inclusion, right? Those words are not mutually exclusive, but we do hear them paired together all the time, right? So I would also argue in a way that we have been conditioned to ignore diversity. What are you talking about, Adria, right? Because when we come in contact with another human being, right, we're trying to build a relationship, we focus on what? Commonalities. It's the first place that we go. What do I have in common with this other person? That's how we can build a relationship, right? You heard it here first. There is nothing wrong with doing that, okay? I do not want to make you feel bad about building relationships based on commonalities. The challenging part is when you are so focused on similarities that you completely miss cultural differences. That is when focusing on commonalities becomes exclusionary, right? That's when it becomes a hindrance to our development, to how we work with students, to how you all work with each other. When you can't see past similarities to how a person is different, the differences that make a difference, we've done something wrong, right? So let's continue. You all here at Lone Star Tomball, to drill it in again, operationally define diversity as the existence of individual and social differences that contribute to identity. But what does that mean? What are those social differences, right? I asked some of you all what we thought when we heard the word diversity. Race, gender came up, inclusion came up. But when we talk about those social and individual differences, what I want you all to think of and what we will, when our lens really starts getting into that diversity area, we can start thinking about all of these things. This is what diversity is. It is race, it is ethnicity, it is nationality, religion, socioeconomic status, education, marital status, language, age, gender, sexual orientation, mental or physical ability, learning styles, and so much more. Right? I've been in areas and I've done presentations where people are like, I think I used like a Prince Harry example or someone, and they're like, why are we talking about rich people? They're not part of diversity. And that's because we've been so limited in the way that we think, right? That when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about one group of people. We're talking about a particular type of person. But the moment we can all start seeing ourselves in diversity is the moment we can all become part of this conversation and recognize that diversity is impacting us all because we are all a part of it. We all have a race, right? What we consider to be minorities are not the only races. White is a race, okay? We all have ethnicities. We all have age, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic statuses, and so on, right? The most important part about this too, especially for your students, is that we are experiencing all of this simultaneously, right? I am not speaking to you today just as a woman. I am speaking to you today as a Black woman who is Christian, who I don't want to say where I fall in socioeconomic status, who speaks English and doesn't want to discuss my age either, but all of these things are happening all at one time, and they impact how I show up in spaces, right? They impact how I interact with people. They impact everything about my everyday life as they do for you all as well. Does that make sense? And we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about how this happens for you all. But let me bring it home just really quickly as to why this really matters. This conversation is so important. According to some census data, we are the world's most multicultural nation, right? Other nations might be looking at the US as the prototype. How do they do it? I don't know if we're doing a great job, but the fact that we're having these conversations more and more and more means we're on the brink of something, right? We're trying to get it right. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65 years old. Right now, we are in a multi-generational workspace. Your all students are coming in with different needs. Someone was talking about mental health over here, right? The same mental health challenges were not as prevalent years ago, and if they were, we weren't talking about them. We weren't discussing them. Students now have those challenges, right? They want to talk about it. They want to get help, right? Some of our admissions processes, what does that look like? Students want their information right now, quick, in a hurry. What do you mean you didn't get back to me in 24 hours? What do you mean my email's still sitting in your inbox, right? So the way that the world is changing and we have these different generations, it impacts how we show up. By 2044, more than half of all Americans will belong to a minority group. What does that look like? Houston is the prototype for future cities. I am not a Houstonian. I am from Kentucky. I am from Louisville, Kentucky, okay? It looks nothing racially like Houston. I came to Houston and was like, well, by God, okay? This is different, right? But even recognizing that within racial diversity, or in my experience, lack thereof, there's so many other elements of diversity that still exist. Right? And by 2060, 1 in 5 of the nation's population will be foreign born, right? And I would almost argue that it's probably happening faster than what the census thought it would, right? 1 in 5 people being foreign born, what does that mean? That means our approach to student support has to reflect what is happening. We cannot continue to support and teach students in the same way that we have. It's not going to work, right? So how should we be thinking about diversity? Here is my nice little, I call it pot of gumbo. Okay, y'all had me down here in Texas. I got my master's degree in Louisiana, so I think I'm okay. I think I'm partly like down with the Creole and Cajun vibe. So we have my nice pot of gumbo here and a nice Cobb salad to the left, okay? If I were to show these two images, how should we be thinking about diversity? The gumbo or the Cobb? What do you all think? Cobb? Salad? We say both. Raise your hand if it's for gumbo. Y'all know y'all like gumbo. All right, we got a couple votes for the gumbo in the back. What about for the Cobb? A lot more hands for the Cobb salad. Somebody tell me why. Why are we thinking this? What's your name? Wendy, why? Wendy, you're deep. I like where you're going with that, okay? Yes. What's your name? Yes. Christy.
In the salad, they choose their individuality while they're part of a larger group,
where they all kind of taste the same. You're absolutely right. Both of you are right. Well, I don't want to say you're right because there's really no right or wrong, but I will explain why I think, okay? So when you're eating gumbo, everything kind of tastes like what? The roux. Whatever the roux tastes like, whether you bite into a piece of shrimp or a piece of okra, you're just getting the roux, right? In the salad, I can pour some ranch on that thing, balsamic, whatever you all like, but the chicken is still crispy. I know when I've been into a tomato, the lettuce still holds its crunch. You understand? It still maintains a level of individuality. But we are so used to referring to the U.S. and to our systems as what? A melting pot that we don't even really know what we're saying when we say that, right? We're taking all these identities and we're melting them down to become one, to integrate into a system that's already established. Well, this is the way we do things. This is how it is. Some of you all have departments that are operating like a melting pot. This is how it is. This is what we've done. This is how we do things. But come on in because we accept everyone. Right? And it's like, really? But we need to transform into thinking of diversity as more like a salad, right? How can you be open to your approach to student support and student engagement, right? In order for people to still maintain who they are, their beliefs, be open about their experiences, and then get the adequate support that they need while they're in your presence, right? But if we truly want communities that mirror the salad, we have to see beyond the characteristics that are what? Visible. The characteristics that are on the outside. We have to support students even beyond that, right? Because when we think about dimensions of diversity, my nice little iceberg, what's above the waterline are the things you can actually see, right? And those are the things that sometimes we may make inferences or judgments about. It's the things that we see in our minds, automatically attach it to past experiences, or what do I know about this person based on what I see, right? But I would argue what's actually most important is what lies under the water, what lies beneath the surface, right? That's where all of our past traumas, our stressors, our successes, our joys, our hurts come from, right? And I know some of you all are like, well, why is race below the water, right? And that's because if you're looking at me, I've had people say, well, what are you, right? So well-meaning, what are you, right? And because they just want, and when I say a human, they're like, and then we really get to talking, and they go, I knew she was black, right? And it's like, but did you? Or I'll have people say, so which one of your parents are white? Is it your mom, your dad? And I'm like, no one, right? And it's well-meaning because people, again, they want to just build connections. We kind of just want to know. We want to figure it out, but it's like, well, why? Right? Why is that so important? And in your case, it may be important because it's like, hey, I want to know how I can better support you. Maybe your race comes with past traumas and so on that maybe I can help you work through, right? But a lot of times it's like, well, how do we get to know these things about a person? That was a question. How do we get to know these things about our students, the people we serve, even the people we work with? Because it informs how Sarah shows up to work, all of these things every day. You may be thinking, well, Sarah's so grumpy when she comes here today. And it's like, no, Sarah might be getting evicted from her home. Her husband might have just lost her job. Sarah might be battling depression. Layers. Right? So how do we get to know these things?
Communication, interaction.
Interaction, communication. All right. What's your name? Christy. We're talking, Christy, communicating. You want to tell me anything about what's on the iceberg? So she's like, above or under, right? Christy's ready. But the thing is, it's weird, right? You can't go to someone like, really just trying to figure it out, like, tell me about your iceberg. They're gonna be like, what? Right? It really takes organic relationship building, right? And the challenge with it is we want to know these things about our students, but we don't want to tell anything about ourselves. Because a lot of times we don't even know who we are in this way. We don't even view ourselves in all these layers, right? But to build real relationships, it takes back and forth communication. I had a student named Adria. Adria used to come to our office all the time. He used to really just come in and hang out until I'm leaving at, you know how student affairs is, I'm leaving at 6, 7 o'clock. And I'm like, Adria, locking up now, like, come on. And I noticed he never really wanted to leave. Whenever we would have events, he would hang around a little bit longer to see if there was like extra food, he could clean up. I just noticed some behaviors that, because I was hyper aware, I was like, I need to find out more about Adria. I need to know what's going on with Adria, right? So I spent a lot of time over the next few weeks just talking to him, sharing to him about my own story, him sharing with me, and I learned so much, right, that I had no clue how this student was even still making it to school every day, right? Long story short, he ended up working in our office. I'm like, we're hiring him, period. He has to work. He needs, like, it's happening, right? But because I took the time to get to know him, I took the time to share my own story and figure out who he was under the waterline, I could figure out how to best support him, right? Not through what I thought support looked like, but what support looked like for him, right? When we think about this, we need to start thinking about the golden rule versus the platinum rule, right? You all know what the golden rule is, which is what? Treat everyone how you want to be treated. Sounds great, right? Awesome. But then what is the platinum rule? Treat others how they want to be treated. And we can only really do that when we get to the root of who people really are, right? Because how I want to be treated, it may not work for you, right? But we're in a business, student affairs, faculty, administration, where it's kind of our job, right? To treat people how they want to be treated and to get to the root of it all. So I'm going to tell you, I told you my little story briefly, but just to show you how identities, visible and invisible, really play a part, I'm going to be really honest with you all here, right? I'm from Kentucky. I grew up in a single-parent household. My mother suffers from mental illness, extreme highs and lows. She has bipolar depression, manic disorder. Because of her ins and outs in life, right, I ended up raising my siblings very, very early age. Right? We were very low on money consistently all the time, survived on every single government assistance that you could think of. I lived in all primarily black communities. I went to a all black high school, the Central High School. Muhammad Ali graduated there as well, I must state. And during my time at Central, I had this college recruiter. He was so invested in me going to college, and I was like, why? I didn't excel academically at all because of everything that was going on at home. I just didn't really care about school. But he saw something in me that I obviously did not see in myself at the time, right? So on the very last day when the application was about to close for college, I applied to the University of Kentucky, just on a limb, right? I did not know at that time the University of Kentucky was going through a complete crisis in terms of race and ethnicity, and they needed minorities badly. They were doing anything for you to come, right? Still to this day, there's 29,000 students at the University of Kentucky. The race and ethnicity divide is 78% white, 6% black, 4% Hispanic, 3% Asian, 3% other, and so on, right? It is not a racially diverse place. The faculty and staff does not at all reflect any part of the student body, right? This was the most isolating experience I've ever had in my life. I didn't see anyone who looked like me ever, right? And when I did, I was like, hey, like we're here together, right? I was a first generation college student. I had no idea how college worked, none, right? It was just a feeling of, I am not supposed to be here. Like, why are you even psyching yourself into thinking that you can do this, right? And it wasn't until I met a lady, Natasha Saunders, I stumbled into a student leadership meeting trying to be involved, and she was the advisor. And from the day I met that woman, my experience at that school changed drastically, right? She was invested in me. She wanted to learn about who I am. She wanted to offer me every single support available to get me to the next level. She cared. All of the professors that I had that saw I was failing my classes, that I wasn't doing well in school, never said a word. They never reached out and said, hey, is anything going on that we should know about, how I can help you, right? I don't even know if they knew that I missed class or that I wasn't present. Right? And so all it took was for that one person to say, hey, I see you outside of what you're presenting on the outside, for me to change it all around. She also introduced me to the field of student affairs, right? Which is where I went to LSU, graduated in higher education administration, got my master's, and then got to Texas shortly after, worked for the University of Houston, right? So again, I tell the story of these visible and invisible identities. I tell my story because I am not supposed to be here right now speaking to you all about this topic. My life was not set up in that way, right? But with the extra support and opening, taking your blinders off and seeing students for their potential and what they can be and supporting them as such, then you get a story like mine, which is still on the rocks, I will say. So now, let's talk a little bit about how identities impact you. What are your identities? I will be quite frank, I was not expecting for 100 and something of you all to show up, okay? When we first discussed this, it was like, it'll be like 50. I was like, okay, cool. So I set up this activity, which we're still gonna do. And if it gets too hectic, I'll modify it. Is that cool? So if you look around the room, I have some identities up. Here's education. Here in the middle is race. Here is age. This one here is gender. And the one here in the middle is mental and physical abilities. On this side, we have socioeconomic status. Here we have religion. In the middle, ethnicity. On the front, sexual orientation. I'm going to ask you all some questions, and I want you to get up and stand under the identity that best makes sense for you. Does that make sense? Based on the question that I ask. All right. So let's just start by standing up quietly. Let's do this quietly. All right. The first question, y'all with me? The part of my identity that I am most aware of on a daily basis is, we have sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, education, race, age, I can't read that back there, and mental or physical abilities. Stand under the one that fits you the best. The part of your identity that you are most aware of on a daily basis. Shh. Listen up. Are you all with me? You with me? Hey. All right. All right. So really briefly, education. Why did someone stand here? Anybody, shout it out.
I tell students how to with their associate's degree, and I tell them where they can graduate from, and I realize that I have an affiliation with those schools, but I do have my master's program, and I need to talk them through how I.
All right. Race. Why do you stand here? Anybody?
I'm standing in the middle because I feel like I'm in both.
Okay. Race and age. All right.
And if I should forget, I'm reminded daily of both.
And so she's standing here because she's reminded daily of both race and age. All right. Let's go to gender. Someone, why are we saying gender?
It's how we start the day, deciding what to wear, how to do our hair, whether to makeup or not,
Right? So what it means, right? Subscribing to, hey, my hair, my makeup, what's going on? What about age? Why do we stand in age?
Because we work with younger people.
Okay. The older we get, the younger everyone else gets, right? Do we have anyone under mental or physical abilities? Oh, yes. Why are we standing there? I'm sorry? Anxiety. Me too. My stomach is in knots as I'm talking to you all right now. Socioeconomic status. Why are we here?
Well, I think one reason is because I feel really privileged compared to the students we often teach in terms of I never had a job while I was in college or struggled with financial burden they have to do. Being a single parent, going to college, I never dealt with any of them.
Right. So didn't have to deal with, I was able to go to college. I didn't have to have a job. I didn't have children when I was in college and so on. What about religion?
I think that the spiritual walk is important. It governs pretty much what we do on a day-to-day basis or how we interact.
So religion is important. It governs how we show up, how we support our students, right? Our core values for those of us who are religious or spiritual. Ethnicity.
We are asked all the time, and because we are very proud.
Proud of it, but asked about it all the time, right? Is there anyone in sexual orientation? No. Yes. All right. There we go. Woo! And why are we standing here?
I'm afraid that you really shouldn't have to ask that question.
Shouldn't have to ask, right? All right, it is what it is, right? And I made the mistake. I did not add language, right? So what's your name? Miss?
I'm Raina.
Raina? I did not add language, y'all, and I'm so sorry because that is where Raina would have stood. She came to this country when she was 33. English is not her first language, and it is a humongous identifier, right? My bad. I'm sorry, right? Thank you. All right. So let's do a couple more. Ooh. The part of my identity that I feel is the most misunderstood by others. The part of my identity that I feel is the most misunderstood by others. All right, let's close down the conversation. Close down the So we're not gonna, for this one, we're not gonna go around for sake of time, right? But I just want everyone to take note. Listen up, Scouts on. I have someone doing the Scouts honor in the corner. Shh, right? We're not gonna go around and say exactly why, but I want everyone just to take a look, scan the room, right? I want to move to one more, the part of my identity that garners me the most privilege. The part of my identity that garners me the most privilege. All right. All right, all right. Let's take a look around the room. Let's take a look around the room. Let's take a look around the room. We have a lot of people standing in education because education is definitely a privilege that we don't recognize, right? We have a lot of people standing in race. We know that races hold a certain level of privilege in society, specifically in like the American context. Age, whether we garners it maybe because we're older, we have a lot of experience, or younger because people see us as like being fresh and new. Gender, mental, physical abilities. We have a lot of people in socioeconomic status, is absolutely depending on where you fall, privilege. We have some people in religion, not ethnicity, and sexual orientation, right? I want to ask us one more. The part of my identity that makes me feel discriminated against. The part of my identity that makes me feel discriminated against.
I have something that's not a category on the wall.
Okay. Yeah, if you want.
Okay,
you want
I don't have kids. I'm married, but I've chosen not to have kids. And so
That's a huge
how do you
one.
make friends
If you
that way?
if you don't mind, do people know that?
Some people do, some people don't.
Well, I won't share. I won't share it.
I mean, that's okay. I don't mind sharing it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's different.
It is
Doesn't really qualify with anything else.
It is different. It is different. 5, 4, 3.
No, I
No.
speak English.
But if you want to stand here because of language. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. I want us to take a look around the room. Scan your colleagues. Where are people standing? Why may they be standing in those places, right? I do have a couple people in the middle, one who does not feel discriminated against, one who language, right? I'm sorry I didn't have that up. And one, I can share your, has decided to get married but does not want to have children. Good one, right? And because of that, something that we automatically assume, well, you're married, where's your kids? Where's so-and-so, right? Something that we don't think about often. And so we have some people joining. All right. All right. So also, I want to point out something really quickly while you see people standing around here, right? Sometimes we tend to think about discrimination as like, it's a thing of the past. Like, did that really happen? Or maybe you were just taking it wrong, right? That it didn't happen like that. They didn't really mean it like that, right? And I want to take into account, I want everyone to think about this today. When your students come and tell you stories of things that have happened, right? Ways they feel like they've been discriminated against. When people share their stories, your colleagues share their stories with you, believe them. There is nothing more important than your own personal story and your experience, right? Believe what you hear, right? You can't believe everything that's in the media. You can't believe everything that you hear about what's going on everywhere else, but you can believe the personal story of someone else, right? Thank you all for participating in this activity. We're going to debrief it really quickly, and we're going to move on.
Absolutely loved your presentation.
Thank you. All right, let's take our seats quickly so we can keep it moving. We'll have about 20 more minutes with you all. Oh no, I'm sorry. All right. Let's take our seats quickly. So someone tell me, can y'all hear me? Okay, I'm sorry, I feel like I can't hear myself. So I'm like, how did this activity make you feel? I hear weird. I hear understood. A little bit uncomfortable. Self-aware. What else? Let me hear some voices in the back. How did this activity make you all feel? Not alone. Awesome. Normal. Exposed. Related to? Right? So all of these things are very valid feelings, right? Because we do not talk about these things on a regular basis, but we want everyone else to talk about them. Because we don't think about ourselves in this way on a regular basis. We don't think about our past experiences or what other people are going through all the time in this space, especially with our colleagues, right? It can be uncomfortable. It can feel like you're exposed, right? But then for others, it's like, wow, people share the same experiences that I do, right? I do have people that understand my story, right? So our identities really do influence how you show up in a particular space. They influence how you make decisions. They impact how you interact with others and how you think. And I would think that this is almost one of the most important. They limit the things you notice about other people or what you choose to notice about other people, right? So when you're thinking about this in the context of student support and how we're going to continue to advocate and support students in and out of the classroom, think about these things. How are your identities impacting these things? Are you really seeing your students? I was doing a little research on culture in the classroom and what that meant and how we can infuse culture into student spaces. And I saw this quote. It said, a bunch of teachers here think they know what's wrong with us, but they don't. If people want to help us, they have to see what we've been through, not from what their own experiences tell them, right? Which is so true. And it takes me to this TED Talk I want us to briefly watch, a little short snippet of it, called The Single Story. Right, so I'll play this quickly. We're only going to watch about 4 minutes of it, but please try to give it your undivided attention. It has some really, really good references in it.
So I was an early reader. I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African.
What are our first thoughts about the single story? What are we thinking about this TED Talk?
Maybe you should play the rest of it.
I wish I could. I wish I could. Any more thoughts?
That's where discrimination comes from, stereotyping and single stories.
Stereotypes and single stories, right? How many of us have had a single story told about us? Or one of our identities? How many of us have told a single story? Right? We are all guilty on one side or the other, right? Now, what a single story does, the danger is the ability to tell the story of another person and make it definitive. That's the story, right? It's not. There's this African tale that says, the true tale of the lion hunt will never be told in truth if only the hunter tells the story. Right? So when you're getting your information and you're gathering from what you see on social media, the news, from what you hear from your parents, right? If you only hear the story from the hunter, the lion who's like, let me tell you the real story, will never get that perspective, right? Single stories create stereotypes. Now, the thing I want to point out about stereotypes, it's not that they're untrue. We can all think of some stereotypes, even about our own cultural backgrounds. It's like, that's kind of true. The thing is, they're incomplete. That's not the full story. So sometimes we take stereotypes and then that's it, right? We put a period where there should be a comma. It's like, yeah, that might be true, but this too, right? And we don't allow our minds to think in that way. Even when we think about our students, right? We're adding periods where there should be commas, Right? Single stories rob people of their dignity, and they make recognition of common humanity just flat out difficult, right? To see each other as equals, to see each other in the same light, right? So the more you understand diversity, students will feel more comfortable and acclimated to the college environment. The more you understand how diversity impacts your experiences, then their classroom experience can change. It changes their impact on learning, their approach to learning, how they learn. The level of campus engagement will change once we as staff and faculty start to really dive into diversity. And your equitable approach to learning and support overall will change, right? I'm gonna skip through just a little bit. So how can we embrace cultural identity in student spaces, right? I've given you all this information, and now you're like, just tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix it, right? And I would love to say that there's a fix, but there's no quick fix, right? Inclusion, equity, this is a journey. This is not a destination. There's not a couple tweaks and you're there. That's not how this works. But what we can do is express interest in the ethnic background of your students, right? This comes from everything from holidays to correct name pronunciation, right? I have a lot of students that are like, this is my name, but you can just call me this because it's difficult to understand. And it's like, no, let me take the time to learn your name. That's basic human stuff, right? Redirect your role from instructor to facilitator, right? Sometimes when people see that power dynamic, instructor, professor, right? Not saying that you aren't those things, you can't be those things, but how can you be more of a facilitator, right? The positionality of it all. How can you see students here? Maintain a strict level of sensitivity to language barriers, right? And when you hear comments and so on, insensitive language, right, about maybe students who are not born in the United States, have a conversation, right? This is not tolerated in this space. Maintain high expectations for student performance. Just like in the single story, people have this well-meaning pity. We can't pity our students, right, based on their identities or things that we've experienced. We could support them, but pitying them and not expecting as much as you would from another student is not the way, right? So still maintaining those same standards, but providing a level of support, the challenge and support. Examine the cultural assumptions and stereotypes that you bring into student spaces. We have to start changing how we think, right? So, you know, I'm from Kentucky. The Kentucky Derby is a big thing, right? And when I was little and we used to go to the track, we always see the horses running with their blinders, right? They always have blinders on because they won't want to see on the left or the right. They're zoned in. A lot of us are zoned in. We just want to get these applications processed. We just want to hurry up and get the students through. We're so tired. We've had a long day, right? While all of this is true, sometimes we have to take the blinders off, right? We need to be able to see the full 360 view. And learn your students' academic and leadership abilities individually, right? I'm not sure if Greek life is really prevalent on this campus. Is Greek life a thing? No. But sometimes we base our students even off of what they choose to be in activity-wise, right? Are they in maybe a business organization versus a gaming organization? I don't know. But once we learn our students' individual strengths, we can start speaking to those. And then ask them what they need from you. This is the most equitable approach we can take to student support, is asking them, how can I support you? I had a supervisor that used to ask me that all the time, what do you need from me? And I could never vocalize it because I'm like, I don't help, right? I don't know. And she's like, but what does that look like, right? So challenge your students and say, what do you need from me and what does that look like for you? That's how you can provide the most equitable approach. And I don't want you to leave here thinking that, oh my goodness, I have to have this game plan for all of these different students and I'm gonna have to alter it for all these different people. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is if you're informing your approach to student support by research alone, you failed. If you're informing your practice only by what you've heard from your other colleagues, you have failed. If you're informing your practice based on your own experience, you are failing. You need all of those collectively, right, to inform your practice. You need real voices and real experience from students. All of those things together help us to take a more equitable approach to student support, right? So as I wrap up, because I have 4 more minutes, you all, so as I wrap up, I do want to leave you all with another short clip. I want to say quickly, I am not endorsing Apple, okay? People are like, why you play this video? You're endorsing. I think they make great diversity and inclusion messages. They do a good job, and I just want us to take home and leave with this take-home message.
Open a door, and it opens all the others. Open a mind, and see what happens next. No great thing, no beautiful invention was created in a vacuum. It happens when we leave our comfort zone and come together. Embrace faiths, cultures, disabilities, differences. Embrace races, ages, ideologies, personalities, creating a tool or device nobody saw coming. Humanity is plural, not singular. The best way the world works is everybody in, nobody out. So who we're made of is everyone. Differences not just celebrated, but essential. Many more women in charge. Equal pay for equal work everywhere. A new generation of Apple, more diverse than the one that came before. Open is not just who we are, but what we believe as a company. Because humanity isn't singular, it's plural. The truth is, we don't see things the same. The power is, we don't see things the same.
So as we wrap up today, I want to challenge each of you all, right? They said a new generation of Apple, more diverse than the one before, right? What does a new generation of Lone Star look like, right? More diverse than the one before, more accepting, more open, more willing to talk about identities, more willing to explore your own identities. What does that look like? How can that impact your role? How will it impact your students, right? That's the message that I want to leave you with. I hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation. I have thoroughly enjoyed presenting to you all. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but I'll stick around for a little bit in case anyone wants to chat. But I am here on behalf of my own consulting group, and so these are some of the offerings. If you do want to contact me, if you have any future questions or just want to run past some ideas, I am open, I am available. But thank you all so much for being such a great audience.